Yes, please do so.
Thank you. I'm Councillor Peter Lewis, Chair of the Fire Authority, and we're meeting remotely this afternoon for this meeting of the Executive Panel. I'm sure I don't need to remind members that if they wish to speak, they use the raised hand function, and they'll have to unmute themselves. So, Royce, welcome everyone, and particularly welcome Matthew Edwards from the Audit Wales, who's joining us this afternoon. So Alwyn, apologies please.
Mary Cloyd Davis, John Brynmore Hughes, Anne Davis and Marion Batesman.
Okay, thank you. Any declarations of interest from members? No, I don't see any raised hands. And item 3, notice of urgent matters, I haven't been advised of any. So if we can progress to item 4, which is the minutes of our last meeting on the 26th of July. And I'll just go through the pages for accuracy. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, and page 5. So if somebody who was there, if they would like to propose them as a true record, and somebody second, please.
Proposed, Chair.
Thank you. Seconder. Thank you, Michael. Okay, just raise your hand. We're happy with accepting the minutes. Thank you. I haven't got any matters arising, and so I haven't seen any hands up from officers. So anything from members on this isn't on the agenda? No, I think not. Right, we'll now move on to item 6, and if I can invite Assistant Chief Fire Officer Richard Fairhead if he give us a verbal update on COVID-19. Thank you, Richard.
Diolch yn fawr, Chair. Thank you very much. Pnawn da, aelodau, good afternoon, members. Members will be aware of the current situation and the UK being in the 3rd wave of the COVID-19 virus. Wales is in level 0 and has been since August the 7th, but positive cases are still high across North Wales. It's expected they will remain high for some time, but thankfully there are less and less people requiring hospital treatment. There's been a high percentage of the North Wales population.
You're breaking up, Richard.
Like he's gone.
Well, in that case, I'll ask him to come back when he's available after the next item, if that's okay. So the next item is item 7, the audited statement of accounts and annual government statement. And if Helen would like to introduce this and then passes on to Matthew Edwards afterwards. So Helen, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. The purpose of the accounts on the agenda today is for the audited financial statements and annual governance statement to be approved by members. Members will recall that the draft accounts were presented to them at the June Fire Authority meeting, and this morning they were submitted to the Audit Committee for review and scrutiny, and the recommendation of that committee was that members should be minded to approve. Since the draft accounts were presented to the Fire Authority, they've been subject to external audit, and we're also joined today by Matthew Edwards, who's the Audit Manager for Audit Wales. And before I hand over to Matthew, I'd like just to remind members of the timescales that we are working to and also the key elements of the accounts. The timescales are laid down by the Welsh Government regulations, and ordinarily the accounts have to be fully approved and publicly available by the end of September. But due to the pandemic, these deadlines have been extended somewhat, and the revised deadline is the 30th of November, and therefore we're well within those timescales. Equally, the form and content of the accounts is largely prescribed by the accounting manuals, which set out the recommended practice both for reporting revenue and capital expenditure, and also the tables that are included. So in your pack today is the fully audited version, and you will see that that runs to over 71 pages. There are a range of tables and notes which are quite technical in nature and disclose a number of adjustments between the management accounts that you'll be most familiar with and the financial statements. Accordingly, what I'd like to do is draw members' attention to the narrative report that sits at the front of the statement of accounts. And that's a meaningful summary which outlines who we are, where we operate, a little bit about us in terms of staffing numbers, where our buildings are, and also the number of appliances. I think it's really fair to say that 2020-21 has been an exceptional year due to COVID, and these accounts reflect some of the challenges that we've faced. I'm not going to take the opportunity of going into the accounts on a line-by-line basis, because that detail was provided to members during the June authority meeting. And I'm pleased to say that following the audit, although there's been a number of adjustments, there is no amendment to the revenue outturn position. So therefore, for 2020-21, our overall income was 38.6 million, which includes the 35.9 million that we get from our constituent local authorities and the 2.2 million pounds from grants. Our total expenditure was 38.6 million, and within that, we moved 1.6 million to our earmarked reserves. A detailed summary of the reserves was provided to members, and just to remind you that reserves are established where we know there's expenditure that we're likely to have to incur, but and that is in the future, so it's prudent and appropriate that we earmark that. The vast majority of the adjustments that were made to the accounts relate to the balance sheet, and these largely related to the 5-yearly valuation of our land and buildings. This work is undertaken by an external expert, and the audit identified a number of errors which required correction. We are working with our facilities department to learn the lessons of this valuation to ensure that it doesn't happen again. In total, after the adjustments, the fixed assets totaled just over 40 million, against which the authority has outstanding debt of 26.1 million pounds. I'd like to draw members' attention to the main liability on the balance sheet, which relates to our pensions. And this is very much an estimate undertaken by our actuaries. And at the year end, that was 337 million pounds. Turning to the annual governance statement, this is another quite significant document that's on the agenda this afternoon. The annual governance statement is there to provide assurance that our business is conducted in accordance with relevant laws and regulations, that public money is safeguarded and properly accounted for, and that resources are used economically, efficiently and effectively. Very much a broad area, and to support us in producing the statement, we've adopted the SIP for Solis framework. The statement itself provides a comprehensive and coherent overview of the arrangements that we have in place. And this includes the framework that's provided by our constitution, our financial regulations, contract procedure rules, and also the scheme of delegation to the Chief Fire Officer. The document itself looks back over the financial year, but it also takes a forward look into the current financial year. And I would draw members' attention to the statement, which includes a number of action plans that we've committed to make further improvements to our governance arrangements. In overall terms, I'm pleased to confirm that the auditor is proposing an unqualified audit opinion. At this point, I will hand over to Matthew to provide an update, both on the audit process and the findings of the audit team. Thank you.
Helen, thanks Helen, and good afternoon members. So as Helen mentioned, we presented our report to the audit committee this morning that sets out the key findings that you got before you today. And we're grateful to officers at the authority and also the finance team at Conwy Council as well for their assistance throughout the audit. You know, a lot of work goes into the accounts preparation and the audit process, and without their help, we wouldn't be at this stage today. So we're grateful. Thank you. In terms of the key headline messages, as Helen mentioned, the positive outcome is that the Auditor General intends issuing an unqualified report on your financial statements, but there are a number of matters for us to report to you prior to their approval. We spent some time going through those matters this morning at the Audit Committee, so I'll just briefly summarise those today for the panel, if that's okay. Firstly, as set out on pages 4 and 5 of the report, and as Helen also mentioned, COVID continues to impact on us greatly in terms of the way we're working, and the audit team and officers have continued to successfully adapt to the challenges posed by the pandemic and remote working, and we've set out how we've responded to those in Exhibit 1 on page 5 to enable us to report to you today. In terms of the key findings, the audit identified a large number of amendments which have been summarised in Appendix 3 of the report. The amendments largely arose to address a number of inconsistencies and some technical accounting adjustments to ensure the accounts fully complied with CIPFA's Code of Practice. And as Helen mentioned, we also encountered some difficulties with some of the information provided by your external valuer as part of the quinquennial revaluation of your land and buildings. So on page 7 of the report, whilst we've acknowledged that the authority, despite the challenges of the pandemic, have continued to improve the quality of the financial statements, we've set out that there is more work to do to strengthen the quality assurance arrangements around the accounts preparation process going forward, and we'll continue to work with Helen and her team over the coming year to help with that. The only other key elements of the report to draw to your attention relates to page 6 and Exhibit 2. And there remain 2 immaterial uncorrected misstatements within the financial statements. One relates to an insurance accrual of 61,000 as it's included in error as a creditor, and a second item amounting to 650,000 relating to a prepayment element of a single pension deficit payment to Clwyd Pension Fund to help address the deficit for the 3-year period as part of your evaluation. Given the actuary had already taken into account the prepayment elements within the pension fund asset valuation, the inclusion of the prepayment effectively double counts the value of that. So in our view, the treatment doesn't strictly comply with the requirements of the local authority capital accounting and financial regulations for Wales in 2003. And where you decide not to amend, we ask that you provide the reasons for that, for not correcting it within your letter of representation, which you've done so within Appendix 1 of the report you have before you today. So to conclude, Chair, overall a positive outcome and subject to your approval, and once you've provided us with the letter of representation, the Auditor General intends issuing an unqualified report on your financial statements. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Matthew, for that summing up. Any questions from members? I think from my point of view anyway, having discussed the paper with Helen, as you quite rightly highlighted, the sort of valuations which were somewhat adrift. Obviously, we've taken steps to ensure that the third party are aware of that, and I'm sure that going forward, you know, that error won't be repeated. And I think the other items in terms of adjustments really, whilst they need to be corrected, they don't actually overall affect the overall position too seriously. So still don't see any questions. So there are 5 parts to the recommendations which appear there, 1 to 5, which are on page 8 of the report. I do have a member who is a seconder for the recommendations, please. Thank you, Michael. The seconder. Thank you, Adrian. Can we have a show of hands then that we accept those recommendations? Thank you. can I thank you too, Matthew, and I can assure you of our continued cooperation with Audit Wales, you know, in the corresponding years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So if Richard's still about, sorry, the gremlins actually interfered, Richard, but if you'd like to give us your...
I am,
now.
Chair.
Go ahead. Have we lost you again, Richard?
Yeah, he's still on the call, but he's unmuted, but I don't know. I can't see any more than that, I'm afraid. Oh, it's coming back in.
Well, maybe it might be third time lucky, so...
Yeah, there we go. He's back in again now.
Chair, I'm probably best if I leave my camera off, because that seems to be affecting my my connection for some reason. Shall I give the COVID update?
If you will, please.
Yeah, I had finished it before I noticed that I wasn't being heard. As I started before, members will be aware.
Well, I can see this is a problem. Can I suggest that Richard actually perhaps send his report as an email after the meeting rather than struggle to try and get through now?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Right, we'll move on to item 8 then, which is the performance monitoring, and this is for the quarter April 21 to September 21. Can I invite Sian to deliver this, please?
Thank you, Chair. Diolch yn fawr. Pnawn da, aelodau. Mae'r adroddiad yma yn rhoi gwybodaeth am y digwyddiadau mae'r gwasanaeth wedi mynychu yn ystod y 6 mis rhwng Ebrill a Medi eleni ac yn monitro yn erbyn amcan 1 yr awdurdod. Wrth ddarllen y crynodeb gweithredol, sef paragraff 2 ymlaen, fe welwch mae'r prif benawdau yn fras felly ydy fod y nifer o ddigwyddiadau brys wedi cynyddu o bron i 5%. Hynny yw, mae'r criwiau wedi cael ei galw at 124 yn fwy o ddigwyddiadau eleni na'r un adeg llynedd. O fewn hynny, oedd y nifer o danau eilaidd yn is, ond cynnydd yn y nifer o alwadau diangen, cynnydd yn y nifer o ddigwyddiadau gwasanaeth arbennig ac yn anffodus cynnydd yn y nifer o brif dana gan gynnwys tana damweiniol mewn cartrefi, ond mwy am hynny mewn chydig funudau felly. Yn ystod y hanner blynedd cyntaf hefyd, fe lwyddon ni i ddarparu bron i 1,000 o archwiliadau diogel ac iach bob mis, sydd yn dipyn o dasg, ond hynny ar gyfartaledd. A rhyw 37% o'r rheini wedi digwydd oherwydd wedi cael eu cyfeirio ato ni gan sefydliad arall. Wedi deud hynny, mae'r nifer yn dipyn is na'r llynedd, ond unwaith eto dwi'n meddwl bod Richard eisiau trafod hynny nes ymlaen, gobeithio. Ac ym paragraff 7, fe welwch chi fod y darlun o'r aml yma mwg yn eitha tebyg rhwng y 2 flwyddyn. Felly, os gai dynnu'ch sylw chi felly at yr atodiad a'r trosolwg ym mharagraff 1.1. Fe welwch chi bod y llinell felen ar y top ar y brig yn dangos bod nifer y digwyddiadau wedi codi ers llynedd, ond yn dal i fod yn is na rhyw 2 neu 4 mlynedd yn ôl. Yn ystod 6 mis cyntaf eleni, fe aethon ni at 2,734 o argyfyngau, neu jyst i roi rhyw fath o syniad o brysurdeb, mae hynny'n gyfartal i rhyw 15 ar gyfwng y dydd. Mae'r siart wedyn ym mharagraff 2.2 yn dangos bod y prif danau wedi cynyddu eleni. Fe welwch chi o 441 i fyny at 478. Ac i fanylu ymhellach, o ran y lleoliad y prif danau hynny, fe welwch chi yn 3.1 yn y siart yn fanna, bod cynnydd y 21 wedi digwydd mewn cartrefi a hefyd mewn cerbydau. Sydd ddim yn syndod, felly dyn ni'n gweld o flwyddyn i flwyddyn, ond mae o'n rhoi syniad o'r niferoedd i chi. Symud ymlaen wedyn at galwadau diangen ar graff yn 4.1. Mae'r rhain yn dal i gynyddu, ac fe welwch chi mae galwadau diangen oherwydd laryma tân awtomatig, dyna lle mae'r cynnydd wedi bod eleni, i fyny i 714 yn y 6 mis cyntaf. A mae hynna'n hafal i oddeutu 4 bob dydd ar gyfartaledd. Symud ymlaen wedyn at yr digwyddiadau brys lle nad oes na ddim tân, neu gwasanaethau arbennig fel maen nhw'n cael eu galw. Ac fe welwch chi o'r siart ym mharagraff 5.1 bod yna gynnydd reit sylweddol wedi bod yn y nifer o wrthdrawiadau ar y ffyrdd, i fyny i 86, ond wedi deud hynny mae rhaid ni gofio wrth gwrs fod llynedd wedi bod yn anarferol iawn a dim ond 49 yn y llynedd. Felly dydyn nhw ddim, pan ydych chi'n edrych yn yr hir dymor, dydyn nhw ddim yn arbennig o uchel. Mae rhai gwrthdrawiadau wrth gwrs yn golygu rhyddhau bobl, tynnu neu torri bobl allan o'r cerbydau. A mae'r siart yn paragraff 6.1 yn dangos sut mae'r niferoedd yn codi nôl ar ôl flwyddyn anarferol iawn llynedd. Pan oedd y ffyrdd yn dipyn tawelach, felly dyn ni'n gweld bod y nifer yn mynd yn ôl i fyny yn anffodus. A wedyn, dyn ni'n cyrraedd wedyn yn yr adroddiad at adran 7, a dyma lle o'n ni'n mynd i ofyn i Richard gymryd drosodd, achos dwi'n gwybod bod gyda fo fod i bwriadu siarad i'r darn yma, ond dwi'n meddwl bod o efo ni, na chdi. Na i gario ymlaen felly, mae wedi mynd, dyna ni, na i gario ymlaen felly, oedd Richard eisiau trafod yr gwaith ataliol. Ond os na i gario ymlaen felly, fe welwch chi o'r graff yna yn adran 7.1, yn edrych ar damweiniol mewn cartrefi. Mae'r nifer yn uwch y flwyddyn yma. Ydy Richard yn ôl eto?
Newydd ddod i fewn rwan.
I've just had IT working with me to make sure my connection's all right.
There we are. With your permission, Chair, I'll transfer to Richard. We're just starting, Richard, on paragraph 7, where you were going to take over. If Richard drops out again, then I'll continue. But I think Richard is better placed on this part.
Can I suggest, okay, Richard, you might like to switch your video off? That usually helps the sound. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chair. So, and thank you, Shan. So looking at the paragraph 7 and the objective, which was around making improvements to the health and safety and well-being of people in North Wales, specifically around supporting people in preventing accidental dwelling fires. As you can see, there has been a slight increase in the number of accidental dwelling fires over this first half of the year compared to the same half of the year before. Now, there's a couple of reasons this may be. We're aware that last year, with the lockdowns, there were a lot more people at home, but people were together at home. Whereas now, this year, there's lots of people have started moving back to work. So there maybe one of the reasons for the increase is that there's individuals at home as opposed to families at home.
It looks like we've lost him again. I think Richard was saying that obviously with the contributory factors, we found that people who, if they're at home on their own, then they're far less likely, obviously, to notice a fire starting. And therefore, when we were all under lockdown and families were at home together, then they would tend to have noticed, a slight smell of singeing. And therefore, they would have noticed the fire occurring more quickly. I'm going to switch back to Welsh, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things about dealing in two languages unexpectedly. Fe welwch chi yn adran 8 wedyn, mae hwnna'n nodi lle mae'r math o anafiadau wedi digwydd. Fe welwch chi mae 3 anaf difrifol sydd wedi digwydd yn ystod yr hanner cyntaf o'r flwyddyn. Ac yn anffodus iawn hefyd, mae yna 3 marwolaeth wedi bod. A felly mae hwn yn fater, dyn ni'n dal i edrych ymlaen, yn edrych i atal yr digwyddiadau yma gystal â fedra ni. Ond yn anffodus mae yna dal niferoedd bach, ond trasiedi wedi bob un o'r rheini wrth gwrs. Mae'r nifer o adegau pan dyn ni di roi cymorth cyntaf hefyd yn weddol uchel, yn uwch na llynedd, ond ddim yn anhebyg i'r flwyddyn cynt. Ac wrth gwrs, dyn ni yn darparu cymorth cyntaf ar adegau, weithiau pan dyn ni'n aros i'r ambulans gyrraedd, mi fyddan ni'n edrych ar ôl y claf. And lle mae cymorth cyntaf yn cael ei nodi yn fanna i gyfri felly, mae hynny'n golygu mai dim ond cymorth cyntaf dyn ni darparu. Dydy'r person ddim wedi cael anaf dim uwch felly. Ni fes nhw'n cael ei recordio fel anaf difrifol neu man. Felly, i bobl sydd wedi cael cymorth cyntaf gyda ni. Symud ymlaen wedyn i baragraff 9, a fe welwch chi yn y graff yn 9.1. Yn ystod yr adeg, fel nes i sôn yn gynharach, wnaethon ni ddarparu 5,885 o archwiliadau diogel ac iach, ac nifer uchel o'r rheini mewn cartrefi lle oedd bobl o risg uwch, a felly reit aml wedi cael ei atgyfeirio ata ni gan sefydliad eraill. Mae'r nifer yn is na fuo fo 2 flynedd yn ôl, ond wrth gwrs, dyn ni wedi bod yn darparu'r rhain dros y ffôn am ryw gyfnod, a rwan dyn ni'n ailgydio, mynd yn hunin felly, mynd i'r tŷ, ac wrth gwrs yn cymryd chydig bach mwy amser efo'r person. A felly mae yna waith i ryw raddau mewn i ddal i fyny efo'r gwaith hynny. Hein ydy'r bobl risg uchel, a felly dyn ni yn tueddu i eistedd efo nhw a cymryd yn amser efo nhw mwy i drafod yn iawn ac edrych o gwmpas y tŷ efo nhw a trafod be ydy'r risgiau iddyn nhw yn bersonol felly. Sy'n dod ni wedyn i'r rhan ola, sef adran 10, a dyn ni'n gweld yn fanna sut does na'm lot wedi newid, rhaid mi ddeud, ers yr adroddiad dwytha. Ond mae'n braf cael nodi bod na fwy o adegau lle mae'r larwm mwg wedi canu ac wedi gadael i bobl wybod yn y tŷ bod na dan yn cychwyn felly. Mae hwnna wedi mynd i fyny i 100, sy'n chydig bach uwch nag oedden ni'n gweld llynaf. A mae o tua ryw fath y nifer o damweiniol mewn cartrefi lle doedd na ddim larwm mwg wedi ffitio. Felly mae yna ryw ganran isel, ond mae dal yn ganran pwysig sydd dal heb larwm mwg, a felly mae'r neges yna dal angen mynd allan i bobl i ffitio a profi i larwma mwg yn rheolaidd felly. Felly dyna ni, mae ddrwg gyda'i cadeirydd am yr technical hitch, ond Dwi'n meddwl bod ni wedi cyrraedd.
Well, thank you, Sean. We've learned to live with these things over the last 18 months.
Yeah.
Just one question for me, really. I noticed that under false alarms, the AFA figure has increased. I just wondered whether that was a result of perhaps being more installed now by businesses and individuals, whether or not you could perhaps confirm or otherwise on it.
Yes, it's not entirely negative. I mean, we generally don't like to go out to false alarms because, you know, that they're non-events, if you like. However, they're not entirely all negative. Some of those automatic fire alarms are actually installed in dwellings, in people's homes. They're not always commercial premises or public buildings. And therefore, we, as part of the policy, the authority's policy on that, we do never turn out to dwellings with automatic fire alarms systems. The ones where we get repeat false alarms from systems in commercial premises, or indeed blocks of flats or anywhere else, where it actually poses a risk through people coming, just not reacting to the false alarms, those are the ones that we really target. If they are coming from individual premises, then it's not so much of an issue. And in fact, we can use that as a way into starting a conversation with premises owners about their fire safety arrangements, be that dwellings or commercial premises. So we take the opportunity when called to engage in that conversation with people. It's certainly something that we keep an eye on because we don't like those to increase where they are more of the nuisance calls, shall we say, rather than the occasional ones from some premises. But we do keep an eye on those.
Okay, thank you. An excellent report again. I always think the graphics and the reference to the 3-year average is more meaningful. Roger, you've got your hand up. You've got a question for Sean?
Yeah, yes, please. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, as far as inspections are concerned, Sean, I'm particularly interested in one-bedroom flats, similar to the ones in Penzance and the areas of Colne Bay where vulnerable people tend to congregate, tend to live there, etc. Do you have issues about those kind of properties to oppose to anything else?
Are these places social housing or are they private?
Well, they could be social or they could be private. You know, there's an awful lot of private, isn't it, in particular in Penzance and other places in Colne Bay.
Yes, but I mean, I can't answer you specifically about the number of false alarms from there. I can see that Stuart is lifting his hand there. I'll certainly, if I pause here and invite Stuart, perhaps he's got more.
Yeah, thank you, John and Chair and Councillor Parry. Historically, we have had problems with single flats, often above takeaway establishments which you know, may only have a single staircase means of escape from those properties also. However, as part of our regular re-inspection programme, we ensure that we visit those properties regular and often. They're part of our priority property lists. So anything with a residential capacity is visited as part of our regular re-inspection programme from Business Fire Safety. And because of the history that we have associated with properties where we've experienced poor management controls in the past, we will make sure that we prioritise those places that have poor management controls for regular re-inspection and enforcement where appropriate. So they're very much priorities for us in terms of our regular re-inspection programme.
Can I just ask, who's accountable in that respect? Is it the manager or is
breaking up a little there, Councillor Parry, but I think what you were saying was who's the accountable person for the property. So in terms of that, there will be a responsible person that will be designated. It doesn't always have to be the property owner. It can be the person who's operating the property who doesn't necessarily own it. It may be that sort of arrangement, but that will be determined on a case-by-case basis. As part of the inspection, the responsible person will be identified, and any enforcement action that follows will be presented to that person if at all necessary. It's different in each building. It is my point, really. It's case-by-case assessment that's made.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Chair.
Stuart, this might be a question. Councillor Gay has raised the question as what's our policy in terms of false alarms to schools?
False alarms to schools in relation to an automatic fire alarm to a school, we continue to attend. So we will continue to attend a school if there is an automatic fire alarm that operates in that school.
Fine, thank you for that. Right, Richard Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the same reason as Officer Ferret, I've had to switch my video off. I'm losing connection a couple of times. If I can speak to Sian, please. Diolch i chi, Sian, am y adroddiad. Rhaid chi gyfeirio at nifer o canran bychan o tai heb larwm mwg. Oes yna rhywbeth ychwanegol fydra ni wneud fel awdurdod tân, neu hyd yn oed cyngorau Sir Gogledd Cymru? Rhywbeth ychwanegol da chi'n meddwl fydra ni wneud? Diolch.
Mae'n ar lefel cyngor sir, dwi'n meddwl y dyfal donc ydi o reis aml, dal ati, da ni wedi bod yn edrych am batryma, taswn ni'n gwybod yn union pwy sy'n heb, fysa fo'n ddigon hawdd yn fysa i fynd ati nhw. Ond does na ddim patryma, unigolion reis aml ydy'r rhain. Efallai bobl sydd ddim wedi bod... Da ni ddim yn gwybod amdanyn nhw. Reit aml, bobl yn ysig, efallai bobl sydd wedi heneiddio, sydd just ddim ar rhestr risg neb felly. A dyna ydy'r, wel, ddim y tric, ond dyna ffordd drwy hyn, ydy trio ffindio bobl na dydy neb arall yn gwybod amdanyn nhw felly. A mae hynna, wrth gwrs, yn ddwy hun yn benbleth i bawb yn dydy. Dwi'n meddwl bod bob asiantaeth felly yn ffindio hynna'n anodd. Does na ddim rheswm dros pam na fasa rhywun yn gallu cael larwm mwg. Does mond eisiau iddyn nhw ofyn, fedrwn nhw ffonio, fedrwn ni fynd i'w gweld nhw, mae'r rhif ffôn ar gael yn hawdd iawn. A felly, dyn ni'n trio mynd allan cyn gymaint a fedra ni. Ond mae'n ddrwg gynnau, fedra i ddim deitha chi sut mae datrys hyn yn syml ar wahan fel i'n dweud dyfal donc a trio gweithio drwy asiantaethau sydd efallai'n dod i gysylltiad efo bobl yn eu cartrefi. A dal ati, pwy bynnag sy'n mynd i dau bobl eraill, edrychwch o'ch cwmpas, gofynnwch y cwestiwn, a nogwch nhw i gael larwm mwg. Mae yna ddigon o waith eto i wneud. Mae'n ddrwg, dwi'n teimlo bod fi'n di ateb y cwestiwn na'n gyfan gwbl.
Na, da chi di ateb. Mae'n anodd, ond mae'n sa'n bechod na fysa, os fysa beth fel un yn digwydd, dim o achos dim larwm mwg neu larwm tân. Ond da chi di trio ffordd, mae hynny'n syml. Diolch o iawn chi.
A da ni dal i wneud yn dydyn, a mae'n hysbys ar ni gyd yn unigolion hefyd i edrych o gwmpas tai'n ffrindiau'n teulu a'n cydnabod i gyd i fynd ati i ddal ati i ddeud.
Digon teg. Diolch, Sian.
Diolch yn fawr.
Richard, I think as a fire authority and a service, we recognise that the remaining properties would be the hardest to crack. And can I encourage all members, in actual fact, to perhaps share the messages that the fire service issue over social media, particularly in terms of smoke alarms and detectors, so that at least we can, if you like, flood the message as much as we can, and hope that that will have an effect on reducing that number further. But you know, we always said that the remaining ones would be a hard nugget to crack.
Yeah, totally agree, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Dylan, you've got a question for Sian?
Thank you, Chair. Diolch Sian am yr adroddiad ac y trosolwg manwl unwaith eto yn eich cyflwyniad. In the last meeting of the full authority, we considered the authority's annual performance report. And there was reference in that report to the Dwellings Fires Response Charter, which has 7 specific commitments, including, and I'll quote, "We will attend dwelling fires swiftly and properly equipped to deal with them." And then as part of sort of the monitoring for that, there was sort of reference to the percentage of dwelling fires responded to in 1 to 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, and 10 to 15 minutes. And unfortunately, the data wasn't available at that time because we were still waiting ratification of the figures from the Welsh Government. But my question is, surely attending fires swiftly should form part of this objective contained in the performance monitoring report? And why don't we have that data also included in the report as part of our performance monitoring?
Yeah, it's this whole question of speed of response is certainly one that's been looked at several times, you know, over the years. There is something about the nature of the area. We clearly will take, on average, longer than an urban area to respond because of the distances. It's the laws of physics. The parts that we can control are about how long it takes us to mobilise, from when the call comes in to when we're actually mobile to the incident. We can't control to a great degree how long it takes us to travel from A to B, because that is just the nature of you know, as I say, of the area. It's not like travelling a few streets in the middle of London. So people can misconstrue some of those speed of response figures, because they can class it as failure if you take 10 minutes to get to premises, but not recognising that it takes that long to drive there. That is just fact. We do manage, we do monitor routinely. We monitor internally if the mobilising has taken longer than it should have done. Control are aware of that. Everything is measured, and against every single incident, there is a time of turning out, a time of arrival, a time of when the incident closes, and when the incident is finished. So everything is captured, and we do monitor the parts, you know, or we do respond to the parts where we can manage that. If something has prevented a crew from turning out in a reasonable time, the time we would expect, then we will respond. Obviously, with a retained fire station, if we have people living within four minutes of the station, then we would expect them to have responded in 4 minutes. But where availability is perhaps an issue, we will perhaps encourage people to respond where it takes 5 minutes or slightly further from the station, because it is so incredibly difficult to get a full availability. That I think is the simple answer, surprisingly, is that if we condense that down to a speed of response figure, it loses some of that sophistication, some of that complexity. People misconstrue the figure as the faster the better. It's not always as simple as that. We do recognise, however, that we have to compare, and that's where these national figures come in, and they are reflected as time bands that we arrive within 5 to 10, 10 to 15, and so on. But the England-Wales figures are compiled entirely separately, quite different methodology. And therefore it's not always helpful. We can only compare with two other fire and rescue services. So again, somewhat limited. It's just South Wales, very urban, very shorter distances to travel. Mid and West Wales have what's known as the Swansea effect, in that there's a large population in Swansea that affects the overall figures. So it's not a fair comparison, but we can compare with our own response times in the past. And therefore, we can certainly provide those figures, but I think if we were doing it more regularly, we would find that actually that we'd get some of that complexity would be quite difficult to interpret. And as I say, I can give a reassurance that we do monitor and we do respond if there is some delay in our normal turning out or response times. And we would have a look at that. We would see what happened, what went wrong, if you like, and we will make sure that we respond, make sure that doesn't happen again. I think that's a simple, it's quite a complex area altogether, but we do have to be mindful of it's not as simple as it looks. And we have to be quite mindful of how this plays out right through to the end.
Thank you, Sean.
Perhaps I could bring the chief in, because I think she perhaps wants to contribute to this.
Thank you, Chair. I think actually Sean has quite eloquently explained the challenges about measuring what is known as speed of response in a rural area. And it's really about the distances that we have to travel in order to attend an incident. Those people who have been associated with the Fire and Rescue Service for many years will recall the attendance standards that used to exist. And they were sort of A, B and C risk. And that actually determined at that point in time where a fire station ought to be situated in order to meet those attendance standards. Now, North Wales, the vast majority of it would have been in the category remote rural, in which there was actually no attendance standards. So in effect, you got there as soon as you could. And in effect, the charter reflects that we control those elements that we can control, but we cannot control the distances between the station and where the fire might occur. So I think really Sean has explained it as well as we can.
Yeah, yes, thank you. And I agree, it is a complicated matter. But the point I was trying to make is that there seems to be a disconnect in terms of we have to report on that in the annual performance plan, but we're not reporting on it in the performance monitoring reports that we get to this committee. And it seems they should either both be included or neither be included. That's the point I was making. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Sean. That's a really helpful report. And I, in my bleaker moments, I work on the principle that I've learned a great deal from it. And by the time I come to the end of my term of office, I may actually be an effective member of the panel. In looking at page 11, just wanted to, and I hope I haven't missed something, there were a couple of things where you talk about a relatively modest number of smoke detectors not operating. And I wondered whether this was battery removal or whether they just reached the end of their life and expired and somebody hadn't bothered to replace them. And then in the second one, where smoke detectors were fitted and they operated but didn't raise the alarm, I'm thinking of the sort I've got here, where if it operates, it more than beeps. If it operates, it gives the alarm. And I just wondered what the more subtle distinction was, and again, whether there was something either that you had recorded and were developing, or again, it was something as a message that we should try to get across as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Where the smoke alarm didn't operate, quite often it's because the smoke hasn't travelled that far. So perhaps the smoke alarm would be fitted at the foot of the stairs, let's say, to protect the means of exit. And if the doors have been shut, then it hasn't travelled that far. So it's not a failure as such. If it didn't operate, it can be, but quite often it isn't. In terms of it operating and not raising the alarm, this is one of those strange instances. Most dwelling fires start as a result of cooking. That's where a lot of these fires are, cooking related. And therefore, quite often, I think from our own houses, quite often it'd be something in the kitchen that triggers the smoke alarm. Quite often people will be there, and therefore they aren't alerted to the fact the smoke alarm is going off, but they already know of it. It wasn't that they were oblivious to it until the alarm told them there was something occurring. So therefore, again, I think, and that's the 40 this year where the smoke detector fitted, which operated but didn't raise the alarm. I think from memory, I think it was about 37. It was precisely because of that situation, those circumstances as I described, that actually they were there present and it didn't raise the alarm because they were there. It's the not fitted that are the real ones. You know, this is where a dwelling fire has broken out. You know, alarms don't prevent fires; they prevent people getting injured by fires, or killed by fires. And therefore, you know, where a fire has occurred and there is no smoke alarm there, that's what we want to try and avoid. So the others are interesting, and we keep monitoring them. But actually, the actual bottom line is that last one of no smoke detector fitted.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And you've actually just touched on the final thing, and that's focusing and directing resources in exactly the right direction. So thank you very much, Sean. That's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you. And thank you, members, for your questions. I take it, Roger?
Yeah, just a brief one, Chair. You speak about objectives, for example, environmental. This in respect of when you say social objectives, what does that mean? And are you implying that you're going down social policy in particular?
Apologies, I missed part of your question there, Councillor Perry, but I think, is this something we can perhaps pick up on the objectives paper that's coming later on?
Is it coming? It's coming very shortly, is it?
Yes, we'll be having a look at the
okay, I'll come back to you
next year. All right, thank you.
All right, next year, right.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Well, this report is for noting, members, so could I have a proposer and seconder for that?
I propose it.
Thank you, Roger. Seconder. Thank you, Dylan. All in favour? Thank you. Right, we'll now move on to item 9, and this is the budget setting. So can I invite Helen again, please?
Thank you, Chair. This item is the budget setting for 2022-23. I'm really pleased that the accounts from last year are now finalised and approved, as our focus will now turn to next year. And in common with your own local authorities, over the next few months, we'll be working to formulate our budget. And that includes setting the budget for next year and updating our medium-term financial plan. The purpose of the paper on the agenda today is to provide members with further context and outline some of the issues that we will be addressing when formulating the budget proposals. I think it's worth revisiting the framework that we work within. Namely, we are required on an annual basis to set a balanced budget and to bring that to members for approval. And in doing so, although the word balanced isn't formally set out anywhere, the working assumption is that we fully understand what our cost drivers are and that we've done sufficient work to understand the inherent uncertainties, understand the risks around our cost drivers, undertaken work to understand what the demand is likely to be for our services in the future, what our resources will need to be to address those demands, and ultimately to look at what resources that we currently have. So clearly against those cost drivers, we then need to look at the income streams as well. Members will recall that the Chief Fire Officer presented to the authority in September and provided an assessment of her first few months in post. This update identified that we have some specific areas of challenge, namely maintaining availability for our on-call crews, and in particular the recruitment and retention challenges that we are experiencing. Also ensuring that we have sufficient resources to maintain our firefighter skills, which recognises the broad range of incidents that we may attend. So ordinarily people think of us as a response function when somebody's property is on fire, but we attend RTCs, we do home safety work, we do missing from home, we support entry for other emergency services, as well as water rescue, to name but a few. And therefore, and finally, the final challenge is our corporate capacity. Since taking up post, the Chief Fire Officer has also met with leaders from the emergency sector, North Wales regional leaders, and also has held update sessions for local authority councillors across North Wales. And work has highlighted the national and regional challenges that we face, recognising our position as part of the public sector response across North Wales, but has also highlighted the wide variety of work that we undertake on a day-to-day basis. At a personal level, I've met with your directors of finance to ensure that our approach to budget setting is known and also aligns to the work being undertaken across the region, and also agreed the timescales for sharing information. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the issues that we're facing as an organisation are common to your own authorities as well. That's recognising the contribution that the public sector has made to the pandemic response, whilst also ensuring that we're sufficiently resilient to meet the forthcoming challenges. We're now facing unprecedented inflationary increases in a number of key areas, namely utility costs, fuel costs, building supplies, and generally across the supply chain. In addition to that, we know there are national insurance increases for next year, which will put a cost pressure in for us of about 200,000. Clear and known for us at the present time is wage inflation. It's worth noting that the local government pay award has not been finalised for 2021-22, and therefore, as you can appreciate, planning for next year becomes even more challenging and difficult. When we set the medium-term financial plan, we had an assumption of about a 2% wage increase, but clearly that's going to be a challenge. And just by way of providing further information to members, for every 1% over and above that 2%, it puts a cost pressure in for us of about £200,000. The medium-term financial plan was prepared in December 2020 and presented to members at that time. And that indicated a net budget requirement in the order of 38 million. It will be necessary to review and revise this estimate in the light of the Chief Fire Officer's findings and also the increased national insurance contributions and the risk-bound pay awards. So the purpose of this paper is to set out to members not only some of the planning assumptions that we're making, and they're set out in Appendix 1, but also to confirm the next steps. So for us, the next step is a planning workshop, which will be held in November, and that will enable us to outline in more detail some of the strategic risks, the service developments, and set out a range of options as to how we address these and the potential uncertainties. The working assumption is that the final budget proposals will be brought to the full authority in December, which will enable us to meet the timescales to communicate the levy to your own home authorities by the 31st of December this year. I'm happy, Chair, to take any queries on the report.
Thank you, Helen. So, members, any questions? I think you'll have recognised that we're in as we'll have seen in our home patches, that the inflationary costs that are taking place, particularly in utilities and fuel, I think it would be rather unwise to make any prediction until nearer our need time in December, in case some of these things plateau out or even increase. So I think it would be a brave person to forecast those figures for the next 12 months. And equally with pay, which is another potential significant cost to us. So I see no raised hands for you, Helen. So we've got the recommendations on page 13, 2 there. So if somebody would be kind enough to propose them for me. Thank you, Michael. And seconded. Thank you, Dylan. All in favour? Thank you. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, we'll now move on to item 10, which is the review of the improvement of wellbeing objectives. So, Sean, this is for you, I think.
Thank you. Yes, as members are aware, every March the authority publishes a plan for the forthcoming financial year that contains its long-term objectives. And beneath those, or supporting those long-term objectives, there are annual plans of more actions, more short and medium-term actions to support those longer-term objectives. Now, under the current legislation, there is no actual requirement to review or to change, rather, those objectives. There's nothing that says that the authority must change them at any given interval. But there is a requirement to review them, just to pause at least once a year and just reflect on, are these objectives still appropriate? Are they feeding into the wellbeing objectives for Wales? Is there anything that needs changing? There's no expectation to change them, but it's right and proper to just pause and reflect once a year. Now, between now and March, certainly, officers are going to be drafting next year's plan. So although the authorities has already approved and adopted a corporate plan 21 to 24, clearly the in-year objectives or the year-by-year shorter-term actions will change. So officers will be compiling that draft plan for the authority to adopt come next March. So it is timely for members to consider whether you want to change your long-term objectives or stick with those for the next few years potentially, and just change the actions. The officers will write the supporting actions in that. In paragraph 10 of your report, you will see there, remind you what long-term objectives are that are in the current corporate plan 2021 to 24. And they are to work towards making improvements to the health, safety and wellbeing of people in North Wales. That's the highest one. Continue to work collaboratively to help communities improve their resilience. Operate as effectively and efficiently as possible, making the best uses of resources available. Continue to identify opportunities to encourage greater engagement with people, communities, staff and stakeholders. Maintain a suitably resilient, skilled, professional and flexible workforce. Develop ways of becoming more environmentally conscious in order to minimise the impact of our activity on the environment, and ensuring that social value and sustainability are considered, including during procurement processes. So it's quite a comprehensive set of objectives, and most activities, I would suggest, would fit under those existing objectives. I think that's the main thrust of this paper. It is to ask whether members, having read the annual performance assessment, which you approved at the last meeting in September, whether they look appropriate. Now, there was nothing from that assessment to suggest that there was anything missing, that there was anything that was not moving the authority forward, excepting, of course, we were slightly held back by the pandemic last year, so slightly less progress made than anticipated or planned. But nevertheless, in terms of those long-term well-being objectives, they do seem to cover pretty much everything that the authority delivers on, and they can capture most. But this is a matter for members to consider and to identify if there's anything missing, if there's any gaps, if there's anything that can't be fitted into those, then if we could take those suggestions, then we can draft them into a new objective. But personally, I've had to think about those and I can't see any gaps, but it's definitely, you come with wider experience from your own authorities as well. If there's anything that seems starkly missing, then do please let me know. And that's it, Chair. It's just about asking, the recommendation is to stick with the same 7 objectives, but it's certainly timely to, as I say, to just pause and consider if there is anything else that needs putting in, or if one is fundamentally not doing the job it was set up to do. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you, Sean. Before I actually ask Councillor Parry to ask his question, I'll bring in the Chief Fire Officer, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think for those members that might be considering the situational assessment that I presented at the Fire Authority meeting and wondering where this fits, I think as Sean has pointed out, those reviews that you have commissioned myself to deliver nicely fit within the sort of the annual cycle of planning, and that fit within those longer term objectives, so they don't cut across or contradict them, but actually support those objectives.
I agree. I think those 7 objectives are a broad brush, so it can accommodate almost anything. Right, Roger, you were raising a query under the last one.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Chair. Two brief questions. You'll have to excuse me because I don't quite understand. Can you explain what social value is as far as the fire service is concerned?
Yes, certainly. It's not simple. You're right. It's sometimes slightly mysterious. But for example, if we are, let's say, purchasing an item or items, then some of our procurement decision may support the economy, may support local businesses in some other way, or local communities. So we add social value in that. We're still spending the same amount, potentially, possibly slightly more, but nevertheless, it's adding something back into the community. It's giving more than we have to, if you like. We are, by our actions, we are being of particular value to the community and or to society through some of our decisions. Again, we are a fire and rescue service, so we are, by the nature of what we do, we are limited in our capacity, but nevertheless, there is still room to add that social value.
Okay.
Does that help demystify it slightly?
Yeah, it helps me. And the other question, Chair, sorry to be, the other question is, and it's a bit negative here, how do you improve people's well-being? That's very difficult, that, Sean. How do you improve?
Right, because because we're all individuals, aren't we? And sort of improving one person's well-being may not work with the next person. But clearly, by the nature of what we do, a lot of our prevention work, we are looking after people. We are looking after their well-being when we respond to flooding events in their homes. We very much by nature of what we do is that we look after their health and safety and also their broader well-being. When we go into people's houses to check for smoke detector ownership and so on, we look for
I understand. Okay.
well-being things.
It's just that when you have people that, to my mind, and I bring local government into this as well. I think they do in particular too much. I'm talking about people's resilience. If we do too much, people will not have the resilience that they should have, like my parents have in the past. If you understand where I'm coming from. No, you don't.
It's an interesting observation.
Okay. And just to finish off, the chiefs said last time that we're entering into a new era. I'd love to know what that means.
Chief, did you want?
Shall I come in here?
Yes, please.
What I don't intend to do is to start explaining it in any detail at this meeting. That's why we have convened the workshop, in which we can then, in a more informal environment, talk through some of the issues that we'll be addressing in the future and making those links to the budget. So happy to discuss that in much more detail when we hold that workshop.
Thank you.
Michael, you had your hand up earlier. I don't know whether you take it down or whether you've got a question.
No, I haven't. I'm actually doing my homework for the next report. I had a question for that, but no, this has been really helpful. Thank you.
Fine, thank you. Well, members, I got no other hands up. So are you happy to endorse that the with the objectives we've got going forward? Yes, all in favour? Thank you. Thank you, Sean. And I think you're in the hot seat for the next one too, which is strategic risk management. Thank you
very much. Thank you. Mae'r adroddiad yma yn crynhoi cynnwys y cofrestr risgiau strategol ac yn amlinellu risgiau uchel. Mae'r cefndir yn gyfarwydd iawn erbyn hyn, ond jyst i'ch atgoffa chi, mae paragraff 5 yn gosod allan pwrpas y cofrestr risgiau strategol, sef i helpu adnabod a rheola risgio hynny, a allai atal yr awdurdod tân rhag cyflawni ei ganlyniadau arfaethedig a neu gyflawni ei swyddogaethau craidd. Dyna di'r bwriad felly. Ac wrth reswm, mae'r cofrestr yn cael ei ddiweddaru o ran ei gynnwys a'i sgorio wrth i bethau newid. Felly droi at atodiad 2. Mae'r darlun yn gyfarwydd iawn i chi erbyn hyn, sef rhyw nifer fach o risgiau uchel iawn, ac ychydig mwy o rai uchel heb fod yn uchel iawn. Ac o dderbyn bod y gwrthfersurau yn cael effaith, a does ddim modd bod yn hollol sicr wrth gwrs bod yr gwrthfersurau am bod yn effeithiol, ond gobaith ydy bydd tebygolrwydd y gwneud rhywbeth ddigwydd yn lleihau, neu os nad oes bosib cael gwared o risg yn llwyr, gwneud y canlyniad yn llai difrifol. Felly, i droi at yr risgiau uchel iawn, mae yna 3 ohonyn nhw. A'r cyntaf ydy ymosodiad ar systemau cyfrifiadurol yr awdurdod. Ymosodiad seibr ddiogelwch rhan fwyaf, ond ddim dyna ydy'r unig risgiau wrth gwrs. Mae pob sefydliad erbyn hyn yn ddibynnol ar systemau cyfrifiadurol, ond i wasanaeth brys mae'r peryg efallai fwy difrifol na nifer o sefydliadau eraill efallai. Fel y gwyddoch chi, mae yna lot fawr o waith yn mynd ymlaen yn y cefndir i amddiffyn yn erbyn ymosodiadau o'r math yma, a mae yna drefniadau ehangach hefyd sydd yn rheoli risg cystal ag y medra ni. Ond yn anffodus, natur y risg yma ydy dim bwys faint da ni'n gwneud, mae o am fodoli faint bynnag nawn ni i ryw raddau. Mater o'i gadw fo i lawr mewn rheolaeth cystal a fedra ni ydi o. Yr ail risg uchel iawn ydy beidio gallu dod dros rhyw sefyllfa sydd wedi golygu bod ni wedi colli staff, gallu yn methu dod dros hynny'n digon buan. Mae dynion y merched tân yn cael eu hyfforddi gan y gwasanaeth ei hun. Da ni'n gallu cyrraedd allan a cael bobl sydd mewn gradd neu cymhwyster mewn ymladd tanna. Mae rhaid i ni gymryd bobl ymlaen a'i hyfforddi nhw. Felly, petas yna nifer o ddylcha i'w llenwi ar unwaith felly, fasa hynna yn gallu effeithio ar yr awdurdod, ar y gallu i ddarparu gwasanaethau am gyfnod o leia. Fel y gwyddoch chi, mae cynnal lefel ar geiledd gorsafoedd tân ar alw, y retained, yn anodd fel mae hi. A felly dyna un rheswm arall pam bod y risg yma yn cael ei sgorio fel un uchel iawn. A mae'r trydydd risg uchel iawn yn fwy i wneud efo colli gwybodaeth neu ddealltwriaeth arbenigol. Rhan o fod yn sefydliad weddol fach ydy fod na nifer o unigolion efo arbenigedd neu brofiad hir mae'r gwasanaeth yn dibynnu arnyn nhw. Ond unigolion ydyn nhw. A risg ydy na fydd na ddim digon amser i handio drosodd i rywun arall neu i gael rhywun i gydweithio efo'r person cyn iddyn nhw adael. A felly y risg amlwg ydy'r bwlch ar eu hola nhw, a mae hynna yn risg i ni. And if I may, Chair, I'm going to pause there and let Stuart come in to give a bit more detail on the operational implications of those risks and to take forward to the end of the report. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Sean and Fernanda members. So just to open out some of those things a little bit more and to move on to the second tier, which is the high risk areas. So in relation to the attack on services computer systems, there's lots and lots of high profile things that people will have seen in the media in relation to ransomware, in relation to viruses and attacks on systems, both in the public and the private sector. And last year actually was the occasion where the highest ransom that's been asked for was sort of pledged from $50 million to unlock Acer Systems, which is a Taiwanese tech company. As well as in the private sector, you will have seen the implications for the island's health service as a result of some of these things. So very, very high profile issues. What we do in our organisation is have very robust measures. We can never be completely certain, as Sean's already mentioned, but we have very robust measures to make sure that our systems are up to date and have the latest software provision, have the latest antivirus type activities, that we close down our systems to prevent unnecessary access with things like pen drives and that kind of thing. But we also make sure that we periodically test our systems and keep them as up to date as we possibly can, all to mitigate such an attack. And so, as you've seen from the table, this is an example of something which is considered to be a very high risk, but with all of that mitigation and control can be reduced down to a high risk rather than very high. And in relation to the others as well, Sean has mentioned some of the things that I was going to say, but ultimately, whilst we have succession planning in place for replacement of staff in usual time, when we have a retirement profile, or we know when people are going to be leaving us, we can make sure that we do that planning and recruit and train and so on in sufficient numbers. But when we're in the event of losing people in great numbers in an unforeseeable way, then that becomes far more difficult. However, taking some of the learning from COVID, some of the practices that we've learned after this last 18 months or so, we're able to very quickly now, I think, flex up. I mean, some of the things we will not return back to our previous way of working. We will continue to operate with some safeguards in place, probably forevermore. But in the event of us needing to flex back up, our safeguards and our control measures to protect our organisation, then we're able to do that now. So again, these are some of the control measures that have been talked about in terms of reducing that risk. And the last area in relation to the very high risk, as Sean's already mentioned, is that resilience of sudden loss of staff with specialist knowledge and skills. Now, this has been something we've had on our radar for some time. We have people who've worked in specific departments for over many years and built up specific skill sets, things which they have, technical expertise around. This sort of we lose people again, as I said, on a pre-planned basis, but the operational implications of things like changes to pension mean that because people have gone back into, or will go back once the protection arrangements have been sorted, back into the 1992 pension scheme, it may have brought forward their retirement date or the date that they were planning to retire, which again may accelerate the numbers of people with specialist knowledge in senior positions that we may lose. So ultimately, we put control measures and mitigation in place to try to make sure that we don't have single points of failure, that we do make sure that we work in collaboration and share some of those skills across numerous staff members across different parts of North Wales. And so again, the control measures that we have put in place to try to support that reduce the risk, albeit, as has already been mentioned, they can't ever mitigate altogether. So moving on then to the areas of high risk, the areas that are slightly lower down. And I don't intend to go through all 10 of those, but I'll just pick out a couple and put a little bit more meat on the bone in relation to those. The first area which is considered to be high risk is a terrorist and/or criminal misappropriation of assets. And whilst terrorism, is an issue which often affects metropolitan services, it's something that we can't, ever turn away from or take lightly. And that obviously the events over the weekend have been a stark reminder of that, with the fatal stabbing of Sir David Ames or Ame, I'm not sure how you pronounce it actually, but the councillor or the MP, sorry, in Essex. These kinds of events, although it's not been suggested or confirmed that it was a terrorist attack, links to terrorism, have been identified, and it's always a stark reminder for us that we have to take these things very seriously on a regular basis. We need to make sure that our staff are prepared, trained, and able to deal with any such event in the North Wales area. But the fact that we do that training, the fact that we do provide that support and control measures for our staff, again, helps to reduce the level of risk to a lower level. We've talked about unanticipated depletion of staff as a result of COVID or pandemic, but that kind of thing can happen for a variety of other reasons also. So clearly, again, an area of concern. Moving down, availability challenges that have been talked about over the last couple of meetings, and an area of significant focus for us in relation to our operational availability and a failure to secure sufficient operational resources. Again, all of the work that we do around our availability team and the training and development and the use of staff members in a innovative way helps to reduce that impact, but there is still that issue remains of an inability on occasions maybe to respond as quickly as we may have liked to, or with the appropriate resources. It remains a risk, although we do all that we can to mitigate it. Moving on, another area of highlight, the possibility of personal data breach under GDPR. And whilst there are issues there for the individual, it's not only that, it's the issues in relation to the disruption that may cause for the service to respond to well, not only the fine that's associated with that, and some of these fines can be quite excessive. It's also the disruption to the operating of the organisation and the management teams around dealing with any issues that may be imposed on us from GDPR. The impact of an ageing workforce profile, and whilst for many years we've had people operating in the fire and rescue service from an older group of people, that has not necessarily always been in the operational side of things, but changes to pension and people who started with us more recently The normal retirement age for somebody who joined the 2015 scheme is 60 years of age. Now, 60 years of age and still being able to operate with the levels of fitness, and it links quite closely to the importance of service delivery of a fit and healthy workforce, which is one of the other risks that sits beneath that. The ability to maintain the health and fitness of people as they get older is another area of focus for us. We put a number of control measures in place with our fitness team, with regular fitness tests and assessments of those staff members, but ultimately it is something that we need to maintain our efforts in order to make sure that we have a workforce that's fit and able to do the job that's required in the future, not only from a physical fitness point of view, but also from a mental health point of view. And again, lots of the mitigation that we put in place with our partners in our HR team, as well as in our occupational health arrangements, are very much there to mitigate some of those risks. I suppose the last area that I'll talk about is the ability to provide risk information electronically to operational staff. And this is very closely linked to the provision of the MDTs, or mobile data terminals. I'm pleased to say that last week we started to install brand new mobile data terminals in all of our fire appliances, and that program will continue over the coming weeks. But ultimately, those data terminals are around being compatible with providing the up-to-date data and information that enable operational firefighters to do their jobs using the risk information that may be available, or any other information that may assist with decision making locally. But the risks here are obviously, it links very much to the ESMCP project and the Emergency Services Mobile Communications Programme, the ability to provide live-time, real-time data at operational incidents. Obviously, all of the work that's going on in the background to make sure that happens is against that control measure, but ultimately the risk still remains. Remember, I don't intend to go into any detail in relation to the medium high risk or medium low risk actions, unless of course there are any questions about that. And so, Chair, the recommendation is that members note the identified strategic risks that are facing the authority. You're on mute, Chair. Chair, you're on mute.
Thank you for that. Thank you for expanding on those risks, Stuart. I'm sure they'll be understood by members more clearly. I did suggest that perhaps under Appendix 2 going forward, that perhaps those bullet points could carry a traffic light colour, so that members would know which ones are actually going to reduce to a lower risk. So you might like to consider that going forward. And just for the benefit of members, the Deputy Chair and myself have reviewed the risk register prior to this report. So, Michael, you've got a question?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Stuart. That was really helpful. What I take particular comfort from is not so much that the cynic might say, well, you've looked at stuff that's very high risk and just moved everything along one. I take more comfort from the analysis that you've talked about and the way this has been executed to ensure that actually you really are containing the risk, to ensure that whilst the risk is still present, you've done pretty much everything possible to ensure that the wheels don't come off, or that where they start to get loose, you can deal with it. So that was very, very helpful and reassuring. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I haven't got any other raised hands, so the recommendation is to note the report. Members happy to do that? Thank you. So before I actually ask somebody to move that we go into part 2, can I thank all the officers for their reports this afternoon, and look forward to meeting you at a very near future date. So, Alvin, if I could ask you to ensure that